RugbyRenegade.com, the #1 online strength and conditioning program for rugby. Are you ready to get bigger, stronger, fitter, and faster and dominate your opposition? Welcome to the Rugby Renegade Podcast, where we build machines.
Today's episode is sponsored by Optimum Nutrition. To get a 40% discount across their entire batch-tested range, use the code RENEGADE40 at www.onacademy.co.uk/elite portal. And of course, members of the Rugby Renegade online subscription program get an exclusive 50% discount plus free access to the Optimum Nutrition online nutrition course. Welcome back to episode 67 of the Rugby Renegade Podcast. My name is Jamie Bain, and today I interview Emma Tester, nutritionist with Munster Rugby. Really interesting podcast. Again, it's great to get a nutritionist on and talk food. And in the current climate, it's really good because Emma's done a lot of research on immunity with the guys at Munster, and obviously that's important at any time, but more so now. So some great information there, and some real practical information in terms of macronutrients, to give you guys some idea of what you should be targeting for protein, carbs, and fats, and tons of other information. Talk about kind of the culture they develop in Munster around nutrition. So it's really interesting. As always, give it a listen and let us know what you think.
Hi Emma, welcome to the Rugby Renegade Podcast. It's great to have you on. Let's start with you telling us a little bit about your background, how you got into sports nutrition, and who you've worked with.
Yeah, fab. So thanks for having me on. I've kind of had quite a traditional route, I suppose, from what most sport nutritionists kind of pathways into the career. I had an interest in sport when I was young, realised I'm not an athlete, so I kind of also, that blend of science in there as well. I chose to do sports science at university. I hadn't decided that I wanted to be a sport nutritionist from a young age or anything like that, so it was kind of very much a learning-led experience and progression. So as I kind of worked through the years of undergraduate modules, different interests, and kind of found that sport nutrition was the thing that kind of hooked my interest, I suppose. So after I'd finished my undergrad, I went straight into a master's in sport and exercise nutrition, which was a 4-year kind of taught program. Both of them were through what was Leeds Metropolitan at the time, and now it's Leeds Beckett University. After I'd kind of done my master's year, I picked up an internship during the master's year that was part of the sport performance department, so supporting any of the performance-based projects they had kind of going on. So that was really the sort of fledgling into sport, as it were, because I didn't have work experience, as it were, specific to sport nutrition. So anything that passed through the performance department, I put my hand up to get involved with. So loads of different team sport athletes, and the history of Leeds is heavily linked to the rugby setup in Leeds. So at the time it was Leeds Carnegie, Yorkshire Carnegie, and a big strong partnership with them and Leeds Rhinos. So there was that ongoing partnership, and then a lot of the other kind of Leeds-based sports institutions and groups would seek support from the performance group there. So like any of the Leeds-based sports clubs, that Leeds United kind of knocked on the door for support. Yorkshire Cricket, Leeds Swimming, a lot of the ongoing stuff in the region, but we also had a lot of like individual sport challenge athletes and kind of real extreme athletes coming through as well. So some that were doing the sort of sailing around the world both ways. We had the army come through for expeditions, so lots of extreme kind of groups as well. So that was probably a post that I had for the full year of my masters, and I'd also at the same time GB Lifting were based, their performance centre was based in Leeds as well, so I'd picked up bits of work with them for the year. And it was kind of, as we came towards the end of the end of my masters, I also picked up an intern post with Leicester City Football. So I'm from Leicester. So after my masters, I'd kind of moved home for a period of time where I was working with Leicester, but travelling up to continue working with the performance projects that were going on through the university. And I was lecturing through the university as well. So it was kind of splitting my time between the two until I was able to move back to Leeds kind of full time, as it were. But the work with Leicester City carried on for 3 seasons. I was with their academy program, so providing the nutrition support from like under 8s to under 21, so a real kind of range of boys to work with there. So that's kind of the sort of historical route, I suppose. As I kind of progressed through working for a number of years, I've always had a rugby interest, and a research interest as well. So I started my PhD program. I had a project in mind and was able to start that and self-fund for probably a year, and then I was able to pick up kind of a more permanent position in university where it was split between my research and teaching, and that was probably working there until 2016, and then the Munster position came up. Throughout my kind of PhD, it became I wasn't able to continue working with as many sporting groups. I didn't think I would do it a good enough service, so I kind of cut back and really just focused on rugby work and working with the England regional program, the academy boys in the Leeds Union side, just focusing on working with them. And then carried on my PhD slowly when I moved over to Limerick, but move I did, and now it's 3.5 years, nearly 4 years that I'll have been here, which is, it's just flown by. It's really gone quickly. So that's cool. Kind of how I got to where I am.
Yeah, like tons of experience, and obviously Munster's a very successful rugby club with a lot of history, so it must be great to be involved there. I'm just interested, you said about your involvement with Leicester Academy and working with players ranging from 8 to 21. That must have been quite interesting in terms of delivering, because I'm assuming it would have been slightly different to the different age groups. How do you deal with that?
I mean, like, nutrition at any age is about basics. So what I would do with the under 8s is kind of quizzes, can you name this fruit and vegetable, and really focusing on real basic plate education. But it's got to be fun, because they're there because they want to kick the ball around and have fun. So it was really about kind of getting an interest in nutrition, but kind of as a fun way, and not just kind of didactic education sessions in the traditional format. But the same principles apply to the lads I work with now: plate education and getting the variety of food in. So the basic principles of nutrition apply across all ages, but it comes down to your, I suppose, teaching methods and application of that. So it's a challenge in that you have to deliver it differently, but the knowledge basis is kind of the same, if that makes sense. It's got to be fun with kiddies.
Yeah, definitely. No, I was just, because that's such a broad range that I wondered about your kind of style and approach, and it sounds like it makes sense. And but I suppose for some of the older ones, you need to make it fun to get them to sort of maintain that. Yeah.
I mean, when you're working with athletes, they're there because they want to do the sport, not because they want to listen to your nutritionist telling them why fruit and vegetable are good for you. So you have to make it fun. Whether, like, you'll get some athletes that have a real interest because they're interested and they like food, but then, like, it's just like normal people. Some people are just not that fussed on food. They don't get loads of enjoyment out of it, but you kind of have to create the culture around food to get them interested.
Yeah, that's cool, and we might delve into that a little bit later on. But first, kind of main question, kind of very hot topic at the moment, as you can imagine, is the immunity. And I know you've done some research on this. What can we do nutritionally to improve our immune function?
So it's really about kind of your body being well able to fight off infection when it does occur. So it's a hot topic at the minute, definitely, but it can be quite controversial in terms of the terminology that people are using. So there's a lot of people out there advocating sort of immune boosting, and then there's a kind of a camp, I suppose, that really hate the term boosting immunity. So it can be quite controversial in terms of the phrasing you use. So it really is about maintaining a strong immune system, and a strong immune system for your common cold is obviously extremely different from the current COVID climate that we're in. So you've got to kind of be really careful as to what you're advocating and what you're advocating it for. So to say that something's going to prevent you from getting COVID is outrageous from a nutrition point of view. But in terms of how you would keep an immune system functioning well, it really is down to your basics of getting a variety of nutrients in. So that whole eating the rainbow concept, getting lots of different colours on your plate, because a lot of the different coloured foods will give you different types of nutrients in there. So again, that's a kind of basic given. In terms of my specific research, it was solely addressing the requirements of rugby players. So I kind of assessed immune function over the course of a pre-season and then an in-season period with a couple of different teams, and we looked to establish what are the kind of basic macronutrient requirements of players. So in terms of how much protein do they need that seems to support an immune system, and what is potentially the value that could maybe have a negative impact, or maybe that could be more positive from an immune response. And the same kind of trying to identify that for carbohydrates and fat as well. And I think what's been really important in this current period is the fact that people have been very limited, probably, in the amount of, maybe not the amount, but probably the type of training is probably not normal at the minute. So what we're asking people to do now in our current situation is return to a training program that essentially they've had 3 months away from. So that's a shock to the system. And whenever there's a stressor put on the body, whether that's physical, it could be mental and environmental stressor that can occur, your immune system's got to be able to kind of cope with that and defend itself. So we've been very strategic in terms of planning our training for our guys coming back in. And I've kind of really tried to promote the fact that you need to prepare for training before you get to training. It's not just eat well before 3 or 4 hours before you go to training. It's probably having your body get used to an increasing amount of stressors, and really have tried to promote that the week before they've come back in. We've kind of set different or modified nutrient targets for those that like to track their intake. So we've kind of set a slightly higher carbohydrate target than we might traditionally do so, but again, it's to help deal with all those changes in stress that are going to happen kind of this week that they've started back with us. So you can look at kind of nutrition and immunity really in 2 different angles. The chronic stuff that you should be doing kind of all the time, and that's getting adequate energy in, and it's making sure that you're consuming the right amount of different nutrients to suit the type of training that you're doing. And again, making sure that you have a consistent micronutrient intake. So vitamin C is usually something that people think, if I get sick, I'll take a load of vitamin C and that will make me better. That will help me get better. And it can be effective for some people, but something like vitamin C is much more effective when it's taken chronically. So ensuring that you're everyday intake is sufficient. It's much more effective than using it as a kind of short-term, try and make me better approach. But there's some things that we would do kind of acutely around immunity, and that's maybe looking at we use zinc lozenges, say for example, to try and reduce the duration and the severity. If someone does get sick with your common cold, then that's something we would look to try and ensure that they're doing consistently well, because from like zinc lozenges we see a really good impact on the time it takes before kind of one of the lads is sick until they get better. So there's kind of two angles really that you would look at, and I think within the current COVID climate, vitamin D has also got a lot of attention. And I think for those who have been kind of inside, as everyone kind of should have been, but sheltering, cocooning, whatever you kind of the terms are out there, but for those that have had restrictive sunlight exposure, then vitamin D really might be something that you would need to support kind of to support your immune system. But I mean, the weather's turned here as soon as we've gone back into, as soon as we've been let out basically. But while we were kind of in a lockdown period in Ireland, the weather was outstanding, and typically people live in sort of semi-detached, detached housing as opposed to apartment style living, say for example. So sun exposure hasn't really been a problem for us. I mean, seems like the British lads have come back with a bit of a tan and the Irish lads are still pale and pasty, but again they've tried and they've got some exposure, but it's not something that's been a huge concern for us. We do blood test players for various reasons as and when we need to, and we've done a cluster of the players recently as part of an immune project we have going on, and their vitamin D levels were adequate. So it's not something we did for this current climate, and touch wood, none of our players have had COVID and had to kind of come back from it. So yeah, but there's kind of a couple of different angles that you can take on immunity, as it were.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm glad you mentioned vitamin D as well, because that's one thing I always thought. The majority of training is outside, so for rugby players, you'd imagine most of them would get sufficient. How do you approach it? Do you just test everyone and kind of see if there is any outliers who might need it?
So we don't test everyone all the time, just because we've found over the years we've gone down that route and found it's not necessary. So we're a bit more targeted in who we would test or not. So those that are more illness prone, and there are some because of other potential health conditions that they have, but for those ones that we know are more illness prone, then we do look to target them and test them at certain time points as well. The international players that we have, they do have routine screening when they're involved with the Irish squad. So we have a number of players who would be regular faces in the squad, so they would have routine testing, and then within the club we're just a bit more targeted with our approach with it as well. I think sometimes you go down the route of freaking people out if you're just testing all the time and you're looking for something that, like, without reason. Yeah, I think sometimes if you do that, you can just end up freaking people out a bit.
Yeah, especially rugby players, I guess. And the zinc lozenges, that's something I haven't heard. So how is that literally an acute thing? If they've got a cold, you'll give them zinc lozenges?
Yeah, so at the first kind of sign of head cold, basically,
okay.
They take these zinc lozenges, and there's a few different companies that produce them now. There's not too much. So if you're dealing with pro athletes, of course you'll well know, everything has to be batch tested for potential contamination of banned substances. So there's a few brands out there that produce these zinc lozenges. I won't name names, but if you can check out the Informed Sport website and do a search for, say, zinc lozenge products in there, and that's a safety assurance program that kind of gives you a bit more guarantee, just because they've been through a batch testing program. So they in general work by changing the oral pH in the mouth, so there's a slower rate of bacteria growth as well. So that's kind of the premise behind it. It actually comes from, I can't even name the dates, I'd say 100, 200 years ago. There's a story of sort of poorly patients taking a vitamin C medicine, but actually using it as a lozenge and finding it much more effective than taking it as a kind of oral consumption dose, as it were. So it's kind of something that's been around for a long time, but it's something that we've found really effective with our players particularly, and I know across the kind of nutrition research world it's got a lot of attention. There's been a few big kind of reviews and analysis of lots of studies out there, and it seems quite an effective one that we find. I mean, we even got our kit man on board taking it, so I mean, if you get a kit man on board, then you kind of know something's working. So
yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Now, kind of when you're dealing with a client or an athlete, what's the first thing you do? Is it assessment? Is it education? How do you approach it when you very first deal with an athlete?
So it turns a lot broader. So if I wasn't in my current role and just dealing with any athlete that I come across, you really got you've kind of got two groups. You've got people that approach you for support, or people that are told to approach you for support, sort of thing. So the people that approach you for support, they're usually a lot more receptive and will quickly engage with the process. Those that are either told to get help from a nutritionist or just feel like they have to, the first thing you do in both situations really, but more so with the ones that are kind of told to go see the nutritionist, is to just get to know them, kind of get them talking to you, get to understand them as an individual, get to judge their level of engagement and interest as well, because like I say, a lot of the science is standard, is science, so you kind of tweak it to deal with whatever kind of athlete you've got, but how you implement nutrition is really the biggest challenge. So say with a training program, I think it's much more easily taken on board by people because it's a bit more prescriptive and didactic. So you have to do this many lifts a week and you have to do this many sets and reps, and it's kind of, because it's programmed in, it's just done. So establish that kind of relationship or driver and kind of interest level, and then again tweak the science as much as you need, but to change someone's behavior is really the thing that's the difficult part. So I could tell you to go and eat 5 fruit and vegetables every day, and some people will be like, yes, can do it, not a problem, and away they go, and some people it just doesn't work. So I'm like, if you think about it in the general population, everyone knows that eating biscuits, crisps, drinking to excess is probably not great for you, but some people just do it anyway. So if you want them to change, it's you've got to establish, how am I going to change what this person has been doing potentially their whole life. So that's kind of the challenging or hard bit to figure out, and that's the stuff you kind of have to figure out early on as well, because there's no point going through, say, a consultation process and giving them some tips and advice, analysing their intake, telling them what they should eat, without establishing, well, how is that going to fit into your life, because you eat during normal kind of everyone has a normal life to get on with. So whether that's figuring out, oh, well, they should probably have this snack on during the drive home. Like at Munster, we have some players that commute from Cork. So how can I facilitate them still hitting their nutritional needs, even factoring in a commute, sort of an hour and a half drive, well, it depends how fast they go, but an hour and a half drive up and down to Cork. How do we work that into their nutrition program? So it's not to say, go away and eat this and you figure it out. You've got to be able to help the person establish the behavior. So one of the things I like to do within the club environment, and it's different because I'm there, so I'm there all the time, and I kind of can intercept and just put things in the way. So they walk into the training centre, and I mean, not in the normal system because we have a one-way system in the building now, but they walk into the building using a particular door that leads directly into the dressing room. Then if I want them to do certain things or to have certain drinks or snacks or things, then I put it in their face, so it's on a table next to the door as they come in, so they can grab and go. You have to make it very, very fluid and part of their routine, because like in our facility, the kitchen is on the top floor, so if they come in from training to the dressing room, which is on the ground floor, and I say, make sure you go and get your smoothie, and it's all the way upstairs, then they're not going. We have a lift and they still won't go. So you've kind of got to work it into there. So I literally just put it by the back door, put it in their footpath, as it were, so they would have to go out of their way to avoid doing the right behaviour. So kind of that's one of the thing to work on, is get your relationship right, but figure out how you can help them in their lifestyle as much as tell them what to eat.
Yeah, and on that, you mentioned some players, quite like to, track their calories and their food intake. Just out of interest, what sort of rough percentage of players like that? What sort of number completely couldn't do that? Because again, that's that individual thing, and some people respond to it, some people don't.
I think it really depends on what the situation is at the time. So if a player picks up an injury, then that's a time period where they're much more likely to do it. In the kind of lockdown phase and the return to train kind of period, I've actually found, because players have more time in some cases while they've been at home, to take more time preparing their own food. Like restaurants are closed, so they've had to sort themselves out all the time. There are some that have kind of engaged with pre-made healthy style meal companies, but like they've got to feed themselves a lot more than they used to. So they've been more keen to take an interest in, well, how much am I consuming, down to the gram sort of thing. But me personally, I don't think it's a healthy behavior in the long run to continually track and monitor, because it can be really helpful to do it in the short term, and it gives you a good picture of what someone's kind of day-to-day habits are like. But if someone becomes obsessed by, they didn't hit their protein target by 10 grams and berate themselves for that, then that's also, to me, that's a negative relationship to food, as much as it would be if someone was, say, it's not an eating disorder, but it's a disordered way of eating, to do that kind of over the long term. So in the healthy squad, in the normal kind of in-season period, you might get probably 5 to 10% that might record what they're doing. But I mean, our season is week to week to week. It's like I think it's like a train that just chugs on, and you stop for a game, stop for a game, stop for a game. So they don't really have the capacity to be tracking their intake as well as everything else they have to do. And I think that's probably a bit of a misconception to the outside world, is that they just rock up, train a bit, and off they go. Like, our lads are in for a full day. They review, they preview, they have meetings, they train, they recover, they're in the gym. They have huge media commitments these days as well. So kind of then to say, oh, well, you also record everything you eat during the day as well. I think it's quite annoying to them to do so. I don't mandate it. I think I encourage it with certain individuals at certain times, but on the whole, we don't go down the route of that. And the players generally get used to, I mean, most athletes in general are quite habitual people. So once they get into the swing of, am I hitting my intake? Good. I'll just kind of stay on repeat. And they get a kind of, we say it's like getting your eye in, you're able to eyeball quite a lot easier, knowing what you're kind of eating. If you track a bit, okay, I'm good, I can carry that on, and they don't need to do the writing down process as much.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. It's that early process for some people. It'll kind of, things will become aware to them that they didn't realise before, and then like I say, they learn that routine and can go from there. It's interesting you said about the sort of prepared meal delivery services. I know like a few players who've done that, and they're always really surprised at how little those meals provide. Has that been an issue with your guys, or have they managed to find somewhere that's kind of for, actually meals for athletes will provide enough?
No, in general, no. I use them as top-ups for the kind of lads that have quite high energy requirements. So it's like fine if you want to get those meal deliveries. It's not so much out of laziness for the majority. There's some that are just lazy, but there's for the majority of them, it's they physically aren't able and they haven't got the time to be cooking and prepping as much and fit in everything that they need. So it's like, yeah, you have your normal meals and then you can have that, and it's an extra, it's addition to what you're already doing. So it just makes it easier to hit their intakes, but we don't use them as like meal replacements. I think that's probably one of the main things to have kind of in the player's mind, is that this doesn't replace the effort that you need to make with your own nutrition. This is just to assist you in being kind of more on target to your nutrient needs, as it were.
Yeah, I guess it's better than going to convenience food, which is obviously low quality and not going to be hitting those targets either.
You've got to think about the fact that after a training session, they're going to be, I don't know if I can swear in this podcast, they're going to be knackered and really just want to go home and probably sit there and eat, but can't be bothered to do the kind of prep work that's needed straight away after a session. They might be able for it kind of later on in the day, but if you don't kind of have those things ready for you waiting, then the likelihood of just drop into whatever shop and pick up that because it looks delicious at the time because I'm starving, sort of thing. So it does help cut down on that impulse buying that would probably happen with some.
Yeah. Right, now the next question is one we have all the guests on the podcast answer, and it's usually relating to strength and conditioning, but this time it'll be nutrition. But what do you think is the biggest mistake rugby players make when it comes to nutrition?
The first thing that comes to mind is that they underestimate its importance. And I think I would say a lot of players do underestimate the effort needed to going into getting it right. So I think players are more educated and they kind of know, it can make a difference. But I think there's few that really understand the impact that it can have. And I think it's usually the players who are injured or trying to make it or come into the end of a career that get it a bit more. So the players that are trying to prolong a career and keep their bodies together because it's just been battered about for 10 years, they probably engage with things because they know if I do this and it makes me feel better, then that's great. I think there's the young fellas who are probably trying to make it and a lot of the time players are trying to chase size, because I don't believe that there's a good framework for development with rugby players. We kind of expect them to go from like a 14, 15-year-old where they're just a big kid to being this fully well developed, ripped, like athlete, and it's just like, that's how do you get them from A to B there? You're not really understanding. But the ones that engage with nutrition at a younger age are able to be physically kind of better developed, and that's not to say they're just a bigger, but a more well developed. They're more like an athlete. So you get the young guys who engage well and they see the changes happen quickly because they're young and they're very adaptable, and you get the older guys trying to prolong it, and then you get the injured guys who will do everything humanly possible to get back on the pitch. So I think for the biggest mistake is usually it applies to all the other lads who underestimate the impact it could have.
There's a lot of debate out there about the right amounts of macronutrients, and obviously it's going to vary depending on the individual, but what some of the current research and your own experience suggests in terms of best practice for macronutrient prescription?
So if I was like setting nutrient targets and going down that route with guys, then I would look at nutrient targets that support their immune system. I think because it's my research background, but if you keep a player healthy and well and they can stay on the pitch, then you should try and pursue that with every way possible. So if I went down that route and looked at a fat intake goal, because I think that's probably quite sort of, it's not a focus, I think, but fat is really important from an immune function point of view. A lot of micronutrients that are involved in immune function are transported around the body by fat. So having an overly restrictive fat intake isn't good. A fat intake can also help you meet calorie needs as well, which can be hard when the kind of calorie targets can be quite high. So I would look at, and I base my recommendations in general on a gram per kilogram point of view as opposed to percentages. So I would look at an intake for fat at around the 1 to 1.2 grams for every kilo of body mass. So if you've got your squad average is 100 kilo player, so you'd look at 1 times 100, so 100 grams, or 1.2 times 100 grams. 100 kilos for a fat intake. Also, that kind of 1 to 1.2 protein intake is high. It's essential that they have a good protein intake. It's not only just supporting your recovery and kind of muscle development, but because these lads have a much higher muscle mass than a lot of athletes, it also means that their muscle protein breakdown level is higher as well. So they really do need a high amount to support their intake. And in general, I kind of work on the premise of twice their body weight, so 2 grams for every kilo of body weight, or you'd potentially push that up to 2.5 times their body mass, again in kilos. You'd push it to that higher end in general for the lads that are looking to support their lean mass. But if they are looking to, say, lean down, then they might, if you want to lose body fat, then you have to cut calories at some point. But if you just cut calories and you cut down on protein intake, then the likelihood is you're going to lose muscle as well. So a higher protein intake towards that 2.5 and 2.5 gram per kilo target will actually help support the maintenance of muscle mass, even if you do cut down calorie intake there. So again, it depends on what the primary focus is for the player at different times. So you'd kind of work between that range. From an immune point of view, my own research kind of indicates that an intake of around 2.2, 2.3 seems to be beneficial to kind of immune function. And then carbohydrate intake is the trickier one to kind of manage. I think historically, every player was advocated to eat loads of carbohydrate, and then it kind of swung the complete other way, and players became really afraid of carbohydrate because they thought it made them fat. So it's really down to the player that you're working with and what they're doing in terms of a training program. You've got to look at how much distance they're covering on the pitch, because I mean, in general, your backs are able to utilize and consume a lot more carbohydrate just from the type of training that they're doing. I mean, the on feet and the higher speeds that they're running at, they are utilizing more carbohydrate probably as an energy source, and typically they might be the ones that struggle to keep weight on as well, just because the amount of on feet work they're doing. So for my forwards in general, I probably work between a 2 and a 3 gram per kilo, but again, you're dealing with heavier individuals here as well, so you might be dealing with a 110, depends on where you are in the world playing, but you could be dealing with 120, 125 kilo individuals. So to say that they need 3 grams per kilo of body weight, that's still 300-400 grams of carbohydrate, and that's quite a substantial amount still to work through. Whereas backs, and again, it depends on the individual from a body comp point of view, but how much, what's their work output like, but you might work between, say, the 3 and 5 gram per kilogram target. But again, they are that bit lighter, and they might well struggle to keep weight on. I think a lot of the time, maybe it falls under that biggest mistake category, is that when players are often trying to pursue mass, they just try and smash in as much protein as humanly possible, but that's really not an effective way to make gains. You need a sufficient amount of carbohydrate to support those kind of gains in muscle mass as well. So being overly restrictive of carbohydrate is not good from an immune point of view, and a lot of the time for developing players, them trying to be restrictive on carbohydrate does nothing for their development as well. So that's the general kind of nutrient targets I might do. So fat 1 to 1.2 grams, protein 2 to 2.5, forwards for carbohydrate 2 to 3 grams per kilo, backs for carbohydrate maybe 3 to 5 gram per kilo. But you figure out what works for each individual as you go through. Like, I've got a couple of wingers on the team, they weigh exactly the same. I think there's like a centimetre difference between them. One can eat like a horse and struggles to keep his mass. One, he could stare at a food for too long and start to pick up weight. So even if there's a profile of players where they read exactly the same, how their body responds to the food that they consume can be completely different. So you have to figure that out, and it's trial and error when you first start to work with athletes in any sport. And I've been working with rugby now for 10, 12 years maybe, so kind of been a lot of trial and error and figuring that out over time.
Yeah, but that's great. Some great targets, like really good starting points for our
yeah, it's just a bit more specific than some of the stuff you might read about. Kind of nutrient targets for athletes as well. Rugby is very bespoke, I find, probably more so than a lot of other sports that I've worked in the sense that you've got different positional groups, and then you've got individuals. So yes, it's a team sport, but like I say, every individual may respond differently to what you kind of encourage them to do.
Yeah, which leads nicely into my next question, and we've kind of touched on it as we've gone through, because of the nature of it is so individualized. So how do you deal with the kind of different needs and tastes in terms of that individual need, nutrition wise, when working in a team environment with a large number of players?
So when you're dealing and like almost catering for the team environment in that sense, you kind of have to just get over yourself a bit and realize that you're never going to please everyone because it's impossible. But it's kind of making sure that the majority of people are happy with the food provision, and then it's trying to provide as much option and variety as you can. And there is a budget; it's not limitless. It's a club team, so it's not kind of endless money pots, but it's being clever with your menu design and the food provision that you have. It's picking different sort of, I suppose, main meal options and working with multiple different plate combinations that you could get. So it's a lot of the kind of work I put into things is about the menu design, what works well together, what doesn't, and being receptive to the feedback. Like the lads, it's not often that they'll tell you they're like super happy. They will sometimes if they really enjoyed it, and that's usually if we ever have a treat in sport, but they'll tell you if they don't like something. So it's very easy to gauge whether people are happy or not. And then sometimes you'll know it's just one whiny individual who's probably moaned most meal times, and you in general, I would ignore that one. Most of the time I would ignore that person, but there'd be the rest of the time where if the general consensus is that was really good, then like if I hit the majority. But I mean, sometimes there's been times where I have met everyone has seemed happy, and that's probably the best day at work. But like it's just kind of, it's being clever with your menu design so that you can facilitate different people's dietary preferences and dietary goals as well. So we tend to kind of stick to main meals where you're able to add sort of your carbohydrate options too, as opposed to we don't the lads just don't have much of a preference for, say, like pasta dishes. So we don't tend to have main meal pasta dishes, but we'll have, say, pasta salads as the side options that they can add to. And then you just got to be a bit kind of clever with your menu planning, essentially. And it's kind of trying to create a culture around food. Like when I first started with Munster, some of the players would go off site for their lunch because they weren't happy with what was being provided before. And I can safely say, like, now they all want to eat together on site. I don't know if anyone's kind of left the site because they weren't happy with what was available for like probably over 3 years now, because it was very quickly it was very easy to identify that the culture around food they weren't really looking forward to meals, whereas now, like I say, the kitchens are on the top floor, so you can hear them coming up the stairs, and they try and do like the sniff challenge to figure out what we're having for lunch. So they kind of do that coming up the stairs, and that's a positive sign that they're looking forward to what's going to be on for lunch.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool. And I'm glad you used the word culture, because it is an important part of the culture of the whole club, the players eating together. So if you've got players going off site, then it's, it's obviously a bad thing from a nutrition and a cultural sort of point of view. And also,
engage. It kind of gets them to engage in what you want to do from a like technical nutrition aspect as well. So if they're happy with the stuff that you're doing in the lunchroom, they're more receptive to the kind of the science that I want to do with them.
Yeah.
Kind of the rest of the time as well. So it's an important part of like club culture. But then from my point of view, it's really important to establish a nutrition identity within the club environment as well, not just the dinner lady.
And also talking about, you know, when things go wrong and people don't like stuff. I have been on a rugby bus when sweet potato brownies were being passed around, and that didn't go down very well. Just word to the wise.
Can't see me, but my face changed there.
And you kind of mentioned, like, when you do treats, what sort of occasions would you save for those? Is it just a kind of surprise, or after a particularly tough session? Because obviously it's important to do those kind of treats at times.
Yeah, I'm laughing there because I think sometimes it depends on my mood. If I need a treat,
it's a perk of the job. It's a perk of the job.
Yeah, that's it. If I pick what's on the menu, so if I fancy that for lunch, we're having it. So no, I think in general we like to have kind of relaxed and like treat things maybe at the end of a long run of games, or say like at the end of a pre-season block. You might want to be like, right, we'll cheers, we'll have a beer, we'll have something nice for lunch, and you've worked hard, and off you go for a week, behave and come back ready, sort of thing. So it's important to do it because you can't be switched on all the time. Like I say, we have a never-ending season, and especially this one has been bizarre, but it's kind of, you need that nice, just having a nice time sometimes, and just to be able to enjoy, not that the rest of the food is shit, because it's always, I think it's always good, but sometimes you need like, oh yeah, that was great, I feel great now, and off I go. Because like when you eat nice things, you feel nice at a basic level.
Yeah. That's cool. And again, this question we ask all the guests in the podcast, and this time I'm going to direct to strength coach, but you can, of course, apply it to nutritionists as well. But what advice would you give to an upcoming strength coach in terms of nutrition? Because they might be in an environment where they're not lucky enough to have a nutritionist, and that's one of their responsibilities. So what advice would you give?
I think I could give advice to strength coaches in that if you don't have the access to nutrition support, and don't try and be the nutritionist. Really try and encourage them to seek out support from a nutritionist. Like if an S&C is able to identify an issue, or they maybe think that person isn't quite fully engaging with his nutrition habits, then it's a conversation to open up about how important that nutrition is, but also that player should always be willing to invest in themselves as well. So they should try and seek out support. I think if an S&C or any kind of support staff really is going to give advice on nutrition, then it's important to respect the fact that it probably is someone's professional job as well. So like, I never give my kind of 2 cents on what lift a person should be doing or not, because it's not my kind of area. So it's important to seek out the right support as and when you can. If you're just going to be giving kind of tips and hints, then use social media to a certain extent to engage with professional nutritionists as well. So to follow nutrition professionals online, because a lot of the time, most of them, they post a lot of handy resources, even basic like infographics and stuff that you see out. Like if you've got no option but to try and support the athlete yourself, then make sure you're seeking out the right information, not just kind of blogs and stuff that are probably out there that are maybe just a bit loose. Try and seek out those nutrition professionals and suss out where solid information and evidence-based information is coming from. Because I mean, probably more so now with everyone doing home workouts, but everyone's probably a fitness professional after lockdown, whereas in nutrition everyone eats, so everyone's an expert in nutrition sometimes. So there's always that kind of, where are you getting your information, and is it evidence-based? That's probably the most important thing, that there has to be an evidence basis behind what you're doing. And that doesn't mean to say that it has to be randomized controlled trial with hundreds of participants, it might be some select case studies that you've seen, but as long as it's well evidenced, then that's kind of a way to get your information. But again, you should be kind of encouraging people to kind of recognize that nutrition and sport nutrition is a standalone discipline.
Yeah, no, great advice. And are there any books or resources you recommend? It doesn't have to be around nutrition, it might be something else that you found that's helped you through your career.
I mean, I generally find, like I say, once you kind of got your head around the science of nutrition, you know who to follow online, you know kind of some of the resources to go. I think what's really important, and it is very popular in sport support professions, is kind of looking at leadership. And I think that's a really popularized topic at the minute. I think to the point where everyone wants to be a leader, but not everyone wants to be a teammate. And I think that's something that's probably there's a few books out there on leadership that I think I've read and are quite good, but what's an overriding message is that you can't have a leader if you don't have people willing to work as a team. So kind of seeking out resources and books on being a team, I think is really good. But again, I won't recommend specific ones, because I think there are certain books that my S&C colleagues have recommended to me over the years, and I can't stand to read them. They're just not my kind of style of reading. So
we're a weird bunch.
Yeah, you are. But I think like exploring a few options and like audio books, I think are really useful for me. Kind of, I don't know whether it's from doing the PhD, but my eyeballs just want to fall out my head if I carry on reading. So I quite like audio books as well. So yeah.
Yeah, good tip. And lastly, Emma, where can people learn more about you?
I don't know whether you should Google me. I don't think I'm on Twitter and I am on LinkedIn from a professional kind of point of view. That's probably where you'd find out more about me in terms of like my career path and things. The LinkedIn profile is probably more detail on that, and then Twitter, it's usually kind of posting, retweeting good papers that I read or see, sort of thing. So both of those are kind of my professional outputs, as it were. So that's probably where you find out. But don't Google me.
Okay, excellent. And of course, we'll share links to that in the show notes. But just to wrap up, Emma, because we're approaching the hour, and it's flown by. It's such a vast topic that you can talk for hours. So thank you for sharing your time with us, and your insights. Has been great, and all the best for the season as and when it gets back up and running.
Yeah, I think everyone's on tenterhooks waiting for things to push on and progress. Like, it is an island and things are moving along a bit quicker now, but we play in a league that's relying on teams from the UK as well, so it's not just we're going to be firing away and no one else is. Kind of we're still in a bit of a waiting game, I suppose.
Yeah, well, hopefully it's all over soon. Thanks, Emma.
Perfect, thank you, no problem.
So some great content there and some real practical insight of how the nutrition's run at Munster, and tons of great information there if you're a player or a coach. So thank you, Emma. Much appreciated. We spoke a little bit after about possibly getting Emma on the podcast again and talking about, or kind of dispelling, some nutrition myths that you hear a lot. And we'll definitely get that sorted out. So let us know if you have any questions about nutrition you'd like us to put to Emma. In the meantime, guys, please subscribe to us on SoundCloud, Stitcher, iTunes, TuneIn, Spotify, whatever you use for your podcasts. And of course, check us out at rugbyrenegade.com. We've still got the discounts on online physio consults and online coaching, the COVID-19 discounts. So check those out. Until next time.
Thanks for listening to the Rugby Renegade Podcast. For more quality rugby strength and conditioning information, check us out at rugbyrenegade.com. Rugby Renegade, building machines.